bourbon here, which is good. Big lunch and then one room and just watch people drop off one at a time. Try to keep that from happening. My name is Jeremiah Dooley. I'm one of the principal architects. I work at NetApp. I came over to NetApp from their SolidFire acquisition that happened in February of last year. Most of my career has been spent trying, first on the customer side, to figure out how to use infrastructure more intelligently, and then on the vendor side, figuring out how we can make infrastructure as boring and transparent and as easy to manage as we possibly can. And so we've called this session Next Generation Data Center. You could also think of it as trying to figure out how to teach an old company to sell new technology to people who really don't like infrastructure anymore. Right? And we've come a long way in how we use compute and storage and where we can buy compute and storage from, and the amount of effort that SolidFire and now NetApp has put into trying to change the way we look at infrastructure and change the way particularly we operate infrastructure is pretty impressive. So we're going to go through a little bit of what that transition looks like and what we see customers asking for out of their infrastructure. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we make that turn, both as a vendor, as someone who provides the infrastructure, but also as users who are coming into this discussion all over the map. Right? There are going to be small customers in here who have never had the ability to get into that big, bloated, multiple silos of people all worried about one piece of infrastructure type environment. And there are going to be people who have gotten there and who are frantically trying to figure out how to right-size that, how to make infrastructure management easy again, how to turn things back into, put the focus back into the things that matter and away from the servers and the storage and the stuff that is not a competitive differentiator for almost anyone. So as we go through here, this is pretty small group. If you have questions, if there's something you want to dig into, we will certainly take questions at the end, but please feel free to stop me as we go through here. We've got about 55 minutes to get through the presentation, so we should have plenty of time. Sound good? All right. So when we look at what infrastructure, and more than infrastructure, what technology is trying to do for all of our businesses today, we've got some pretty clear things that we can focus on. Right? The first is delivering real-time insight, delivering real-time whatever the thing is, capacity, performance, availability, the ability to run the applications that we need to run, but the ability to do that and adapt to that in real time. We used to be able to say, I know you need that, give me 3 weeks, because I've got to go get a PO cut, and I've got to go wait for something to ship, and then I've got to figure out how to get it into the data center. And we just don't have the ability, generally, to push back like that onto our customers anymore. And so being able to deliver that in real time, but then also engaging with those end users and finding out what it is that they need and being able to give it to them. Life was easy when the company got to decide, we're going to support these apps. And we're going to support these apps in these configurations with these features, and here's how quickly we're going to update them, and everybody needs to figure that out. Right? Now we've got lines of business, and we've got consumers coming to us and saying, this is what we needed yesterday, this is what we will accept today, but you need to be prepared to deliver this to me tomorrow. And so the ability for the business units to drive the experience, to drive the features, to drive the things that we end up having to build on the back end is probably as intense today as it has ever been. And then finally, we can't do anything outside of, we can't do anything in a vacuum outside the business. We know budgets are what they are. We know staffing is what it is. We also know that everything that we do on the IT side ends up creating the experience that's being consumed. Maybe that's students. Maybe that's maybe that's the public. Maybe that's a specific type of consumer. Maybe that's a specific type of business. But the things that we do on the IT back end have to show that we're driving that business forward, or at least not holding that business back. So if we take at a business level these 3 things that technologists are trying to drive into that, then we have the ability to start to figure out why do we want to do this and where are the obstacles to it. And when we look at these, we've got some business pressures that we need to be able to figure out. Right? We can't adapt fast enough as the needs change, as the needs, not just from an application standpoint, but as growth increases, as the number of ways that we have to consume infrastructure, as the drive towards cloud computing increases, we need to be able to change faster. The upgrade cycles are generally killing customers. If I had to take the number one challenge that customers face outside of everything else, it would be this idea of a fixed and forced refresh cycle, right? Because it doesn't scale, it doesn't end up providing any intrinsic value to the company, and it ends up being something where customers feel like the vendor is driving their behavior and not the other way around. And so I think across all of the companies I've worked for and all the different infrastructure products that we've talked to customers about, that idea of let me consume as I need to, let me depreciate as I want to, and then let me decommission as I choose to, rather than forcing those things on me in 3, 4, 5 year increments and then driving that behavior home with support contracts and all the rest of it, I would say is probably that number one issue. And then the complexity side of things. We probably have, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a minute, we probably have the widest delta we've ever had between the oldest applications in our environments and the newest applications in our environments. And it's not just an age thing, it's the architecture they want to run, it's the skill set that's required to keep them running, it's where we want to go and how do we consolidate that down. And that complexity shows up on the back end before it shows up on the front end. The customer, the end users just want what they want. It's the people on the back side of that that have to figure out how to put all that together. And so if we drive these things down, if we look at manual provisioning, limited scalability, if we know that whether it's through different types of architectures or different types of deployment models or lots of different vendors with their hands in the same thing, that we drive this complexity up, that it becomes more costly, and that ultimately we are limited in our ability to integrate that with, not necessarily replace, but integrate that in with the cloud services that we want to do. What we get is this idea of what that next generation looks like. And we call it lots of things, right? We've heard it called infrastructure 2.0 or software-defined data center or private cloud. The idea here is how can we drive simplicity, both from an acquisition, implementation, operation and support standpoint, how can we drive simplicity as the number one overriding feature in there? Right? We know that the back end, I mean, the level of commodity in servers and storage and virtualization and networking at this point is pretty high. Right? We're not trying to necessarily differentiate between one processor vendor and another anymore. What we're trying to differentiate in is how can we turn that infrastructure into something that's useful and easy to operate. So every vendor has their up and to the right slide, right? Whether it's journey to virtualization or journey to the cloud. This one was interesting to me because it focuses on the stuff that I work with customers, particularly on the data center operations side. And if we look at this from the bottom left, we've probably collectively spent the better part of the last 10 years of our careers working through the virtualization wave. Right? And we started that with standardizing. We made sure that we had a few different things that we had to manage inside the data center. We consolidated it down. We got the ability to drive more memory and more CPU into the servers. We got the ability to use bigger, larger, and faster hard drives. And then we virtualized the crap out of everything. Right? We get into now the automate phase. The how do we make this easier? How do we take if I do it once, it's a manual process. If I do it 5 times, it's an automated script. Right? How do we simplify that as much as possible? The challenge is, more and more, we have organizations within our companies. We have consumers within our company that are coming at us from the complete opposite direction. There is an entire generation, not just of consumers, but of IT people, of IT administrators, of IT executives, who are coming at this from a cloud standpoint, who don't understand and have no interest in understanding all of this path that's come before them to build the IT organizations that we have to run today. And so this ends up being the innovation point. As a vendor, if we can allow for the continued and accelerated transition up through the orchestration and automation side of things from the traditional IT stacks. But if we can also allow that to be visible and available and consumable by the people who think that Amazon Web Services and the API that comes with it is the only infrastructure anybody will ever need, if we can enable them to do the things that they want to do inside the environments that we need them to do it, then we've accomplished something. Then we've taken both audiences, the traditional I must have infrastructure to provide resiliency groups, right? I mean, these are the Oracles and SAPs and Microsoft Exchanges and SharePoints of the world, with the new organizations coming in and saying, I'm just going to develop this myself. I'm going to build it myself. I need to spin up 5,000 of these in order to do a unit test for this new build of code. I need you to be able to do that for me, or I'm going to go swipe a credit card somewhere. If we can do both of those together, and if we can focus everything that NetApp is doing from a portfolio and an innovation standpoint here, we've got a really interesting story that we can tell both customers and the partners in the field. And so whatever we call this, right, we decided that rather than have to wade through the buzzwords of what does that environment look like, we were going to have two platforms, one at the top, one at the bottom. One is a firm and concrete belief and integration into everything that we do that cloud computing has a place both on the compute and storage side, and it's our job to drive as much of the NetApp intellectual property, tools, feature sets, and everything else that we do into the cloud environments that our customers want to use. And then the second is that if we drive a core set of requirements, if we use some keystone guidance around the next generation data center, we can build a platform that allows us to extend out, but also take care of the things that we have inside. And so this idea of scale out as an architectural feature from top to bottom, guaranteed performance, being able to drive meaningful consolidation, automating the management as much as we can, providing the data assurance, the replication, the disaster recovery, the protection that we need to, and then making that as efficient as we can, both from a financial standpoint with the dedupes and the compressions and the thin provisionings, but also from an operational standpoint, then we have a foundation that we can start to build on top of. This turning point, oh, build slide, how lucky for you. This turning point here is when the way that we've always done things becomes less important than that operational transformation that we need to be able to figure out. Because even as NetApp, if we have customers that want to stay with traditional architectures, that want to stay with the traditional applications and the use cases that they've been doing, we are happy to sell you gear all day long. We're really good at it. Customers are really happy with it. But there comes a point at which the refresh cycle, and there comes a point at which the ability to scale, there comes a point at which the ability to consolidate becomes limited enough that we are collectively going to look at how do we drive a flexible consumption model in there, and then how do we get from point A to point B. So how do we turn that corner from what we've always done before, if they give me an audio for the room off the computer, there's a great video. The thing that we compete with most is not other storage vendors. It's not the marketplace. It's not AWS and cloud providers. It's inertia. Right? It's the inertia of this is what we've always done. This is what we're comfortable doing. This is what we know how to sell to the people who are building the budgets and the people who are writing out the plans. And so figuring out where that point is, where it makes sense to put the effort into how do we build that transformation plan, and what the benefits are going to be over what we've done really well for the last few years, that's the place where we want to start having that conversation with customers. It doesn't have to be when you want to buy something. If you want to buy something, that's great. What's more important is we need to start having that conversation when the benefits of that transformation outweigh the comfort or the known practices of being able to keep what we've put in there. These silos, how many of you have today a storage team and a networking team and a compute team? All right, and then how many of you just have one team that ends up having to run everything? Awesome. Now, The question is that because you've chosen that as an operational model, or is that because you just don't have the resources? And yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so we see customers on both sides of that, right? The ones that are the most frustrating, honestly, are the company like NetApp's fault, right? NetApp and EMC and HP and IBM and Hitachi, we've spent the last 20 years building these silos, right? We spent the last 20 years trying to isolate out of the herd the people who are going to be directly responsible for the stuff that they were going to buy from us, because it made it a whole lot easier to take people to dinner. It made it a whole lot easier to invite people to conferences, right? And so the good news is that for most of you, you never got to that point internally to begin with, because as much as it made my life easy, it didn't necessarily always make your life easy to have all of those silos in there. The roof's going to come down on us. So this transfer of ownership, where traditionally we would have infrastructure owners, right, who are the people running servers, network, and storage, and then we have the infrastructure influencers. These weren't the people who had to do the day-to-day operation. They were the ones building the designs. They were the ones making the recommendations. As we continue to move forward, more and more of this gets above the line of IT. And so the owners in here are the people who are running the business units, the people who are running the departments, the people who are deciding this is the application that you're going to run for me, or this is the infrastructure you're going to put together for me. More and more of that gets driven by the business and the application, and the influencers in many cases become the developers who are building those platforms. And again, those are the folks who are coming from the top down on that graph, who don't understand the limitations or the functionality of the infrastructure that's under there and never really want to. As we continue to progress through here, there is some of that that ends up staying the same, right? That transition away from a legacy environment. I mean, IBM's still making $1 billion a year off of mainframes, right? Traditional virtualization on top of x86 hardware is not going anywhere anytime soon, but the transition on top of that ends up being pretty interesting, and what it looks like and how we operate it, how much more automation and orchestration we put into it, and what type of infrastructure we end up putting it on top of. So our design goals, when we were building the next generation data center portfolio, all of the infrastructure that rolls up under this business unit, ended up looking a lot like the design goals for the developers who are building applications inside our customers' organizations. The first was decouple. And decouple for us is not just a hardware and software standpoint, it's a everything from everything we can standpoint. Being able to run software on top of commodity hardware is great. Being able to choose 2 or 3 different licensing models for customers who want to buy on demand, for customers who want to buy through a service provider, for customers who want to buy in bulk and license by capacity instead of licensing by individual node that they buy. Being able to decouple how we deliver for the hardware from how we deliver and support the software was something that we wanted to be able to drive into every part of that. The second is self-healing. I think storage in particular has done a generally terrible job about demanding your attention when something goes wrong. Every time we have a controller problem, every time we have a disk problem, every time we have an interconnect problem, there's somebody who has to go somewhere to do something before we get back to normal operations, before we get back to normal performance, before we get back to normal availability, and usually there's a clock on that. But if we don't do that quick enough, we're in a situation where we don't have redundancy should something else fail. And that's not your fault, that's our fault. That's an architectural issue where we philosophically decided that you will pay for us to give you lots and lots of things that can fail at once, and we'll just continue to degrade as gracefully as we can. You'll get less performance, you'll get less availability, but everything will stay up and you just dispatch somebody out to a data center at 2 o'clock in the morning and pay for the 4-hour support that gets you the piece that you need to be able to replace it. Again, one of those things that customers really push back on us, even if they've come to accept it just as this is how storage works. Right? This is how storage arrays, this is how storage vendors work. So driving more self-healing into the entire architecture so that being able to being able to withstand a failure without losing performance, without losing availability, and being able to schedule and manage the operational side very differently than we used to was something that we wanted to drive in there. The microservices and small improvements go together. One of the things that blew my mind when SolidFire got acquired by NetApp was how slowly customers would upgrade the software on their storage arrays. We announced in an earnings statement, not this one that we just did yesterday, but the one that we did before that, that like 60% of all new NetApp arrays were being sold with the newest version of software on it. For a new version of software that's been out 14 months, which means there's a huge percentage of storage arrays that we sell with a version of software on them, and customers are using versions of software on them that are more than a year out of date. On the SolidFire side, if we got less than 85% of our customer base to upgrade within 45 days after releasing a new version of software, we were pissed. I mean, even just from a support standpoint, you know, we release new software because it makes things better, because it makes things perform better, it makes things more reliable. If you're not upgrading, we're having to support you on something that you know isn't as good as where you need to be. And so what we realized was customers will upgrade faster if we can do two things. One is give them meaningful reasons to do it. Give them features, give them functions, and stop creating new license line items and requirements for POs in order to be able to use it. If we're going to release a new feature, if we're going to ask you to upgrade to get access to that feature, then you get it as part of your ownership or your licensing of the array. It can't be a separate feature that we tack on afterwards. And then the second is we have to de-risk the process. Right? We have to be able to say, yes, here's how the upgrade process works, and here's how you can do that without impacting. We're going to minimize your change control windows. We're going to make this less of an issue for you. Right? When I worked at VCE, we didn't do storage upgrades at all. We just waited till customers refreshed. It was easier that way. We didn't have to worry about something bad happening in the middle of an upgrade, because you're going to have to, within 3 years, replace that because you want a new storage array or you want a new version of something anyway. Right? So we have to be able to provide smaller feature upgrades, but then also make that a less risky proposition for customers. And then easy rollback. And easy rollback is not just a software thing. It's great to get halfway through a cluster of upgrade and go, no, and roll that back to something that you're comfortable with. We also want you to be able to make changes in the decision process as we go through this. So one of the things that always fascinated me about buying traditional storage arrays is that your storage vendor is asking you to make a very uneducated guess over a long period of time. Right? You want to buy a storage array and you have to guess how much capacity and performance you're going to need for the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And you need to decide upfront how much of that you want to plan for, how big you want the controllers to be, and then how much of that you want to actually buy. And they're always going to incent it to make it better for you to buy more of it up front, even if you know you're not going to end up using it. And hopefully, at the end of that, we've overbuilt just a little bit so that everything's nice and comfortable. Worst case scenario, we've underbuilt, and at some point you've got to refresh faster than you want to. The budget people love that. Or we way overspec'd it, and by the time you refresh it, you've never used half of what you paid for it. Right? Budget people also love that. So this idea that we can give you the ability to build for what you need today, the project that you're running right now, that you need to have that performance for, let's build for that today. And then the next project that comes along, I don't want you to build a whole other storage array for it. I just want you to add capacity to the one you already have. And the next project that comes along, and the next migration that comes along, and the next acquisition that comes along, whatever the reason is that you would drive additional needs for capacity and performance, let's just add those in as we go. Let's keep ourselves from having to figure out how to fix a problem 3 years down the road, or more likely fix the problem that the guy before us made 3 years ago once we get in and start figuring it out. So if we can deliver these design goals into what we're doing from an infrastructure standpoint, then I think we're much better aligned with where our customers are asking us to be today. And the next part of that complication is you probably have more different ways to buy hardware today than you've ever had them. If we go back 6 years ago, we had storage that was generally dual controllers with fiber channel arbitrated loop shelves underneath it, and we had rack mount x86 servers. Now, damn, there's 27 different ways to get those two resources into your data center. What we decided, and even more than the consumption models, are the vendors who have said this is the consumption model we're going to position, right? That if you want to use Pure, you get a dual controller, shared shelf storage array. If you want to use Nutanix, everything comes as HCI. Every time we introduce one of those new vendors into the mix, it just makes things more complicated from a support standpoint, from a deployment standpoint. What NetApp decided was, we don't care. Our job is not to pick a deployment model and say, this is the right way to go, this is what you should be doing. Our job is to build the best possible storage software on the planet and then allow you to consume it however you want to. So for customers who want to deploy software on commodity hardware, right, we can use the Element X program and do that as a scale-out all-flash storage array. We can do that with ONTAP on top of whatever disks it is that we want, including disks that happen to live in Azure or AWS. Customers who want traditional best-of-breed appliances, obviously no problems there, whether that's 1U node based, whether that's shared controller, however it is that you want to consume that, we're going to deliver it. If that's converged, on the FlexPod side of things, right, we've got 7 years at this point, 8 years worth of track record of how to deliver that reference architecture to our partners. The FlexPod SolidFire, so the all-flash node-based Cisco-led FlexPod for customers who love the program and want the SolidFire in there, actually gets launched in a week, I want to say. And then we've made no secret about the fact that we are going to drive all of this technology into a hyper-converged form factor as well. So for customers who are used to and comfortable with that 4 nodes in a 2U chassis, who are looking to manage the entire thing from the platform that sits above it, right? I don't want to have infrastructure people, I want to have VMware people. Then we'll deliver the exact same features, the exact same software in that configuration. And then finally, with the as a service, when I started at SolidFire, almost 85% of our revenue came out of service providers. So there is a very good chance that whether you are using a managed service provider who's selling you shared storage, or you're using an application as a service provider, chances are you've been interacting with SolidFire software all along the way. The interesting one I heard the other day is you can't buy a US postal stamp online in the US without interacting with SolidFire storage on the back end. Because there were only 2 companies who did that, and they were both SolidFire customers, and one of them just bought the other. So every US postal stamp, every US postage transaction that gets done online happens on top of SolidFire hardware, which is kind of cool, right? But the important part here is, regardless of how you want to consume that, we want to give you the same 2 kick-ass products that we've delivered for customers for however many years at this point in whatever form factor you need, and then tie that together to make those silos of storage, right? Here's our all-flash product, and here's our FAS product, and here's our all-flash FAS, and here's our object storage, and here's our backup storage. Tie all of that together on the back end so that you can transparently move data volumes, that you can move workloads between them. So if I want to run SolidFire as my production storage, but I've got a FAS array that I've used forever that I love, if I want to be able to take snapshots off one and move them to the other, we want to make that less of a checkbox portfolio and more of something that's integrated in that we can deliver across the whole platform. If we do this right, you'll notice that the NetApp stuff lives way down at the bottom. Right? The compute, storage, and network are our raw tools. We roll them up into whatever acquisition model, whatever consumption model makes sense for us. But here are the things that we need to be able to focus on. Right? And here's the things that you are focused on that we need to recognize and do a better job of helping. We need to focus more on the operations side. How do we drive more efficiency into this? How do we end up making the people that you have who have to deal with this every day more flexible, give them the ability to get more done with less switching back and forth between user interfaces, switching back and forth between contexts. How do we give you a support organization that helps make that happen? Workloads and apps, these need to be, without the applications, what the hell are we doing? Right? It's the only thing the infrastructure lives for. So being able to design best practices for those, but also being able to design integrations specifically with them, not just within the app itself, but within where it lives. So being able to take applications and being able to migrate them off premises, or being able to burst those out into cloud environments, depending on what we need to do, being able to replicate for test dev cases, all of those things we need to be able to focus on. The integrations become something that's really fun now that everything that we do is API driven. Some of those are easy. Some of those are, I don't ever want you to leave the vCenter, the vCenter console in order to be able to manage the entire infrastructure stack. Some of those are more fun. I'm going to give you the ability to do everything the storage array is possibly capable of doing to a PowerShell module. So that however you want to script it, however you want to plug it in, would you like to move I/O around as you do backup jobs? Right? Would you like to reallocate I/O from some volumes to other volumes so that you can minimize the amount of time that it takes to run the backups on them? But you don't want to have a human being doing that, and you sure as hell don't want to go to a UI to do it. So how about if I give you a PowerShell script that you can batch and run at the beginning and end of every backup job that you do to move the infrastructure around and the performance of that infrastructure around to help make the operational outcome better, right? And then how can we do that across every platform that we need? My guess is that most of you are using Microsoft or VMware platforms today. My guess is that over time, many of you will start looking at or digging into whether or not OpenStack is finally full-featured enough to be a more cost-effective alternative to what it is that you're using internally. And my guess is that at some point, someone's going to come and say, we've developed this entire app in a container ecosystem, and we need the infrastructure to be able to support those. Our job is not to make you pick one or the other, but to be able to support all of those equally across the infrastructure. Because this is where we talked about that delta. The delta is not just between new apps and old apps, it's between new platforms and old platforms. We have customers who are running AS400s and fully Kubernetes managed and orchestrated container platforms all in the same data center. And the amount of expertise that it takes to do that, the amount of people that it takes to do that, but then also the amount of infrastructure that it takes to run that in the back end is a little bit absurd. And so we can't do much to help with the AS400s, but if we can take everything from VMware through where we are today with containers and be able to say, here's one granularly scalable, workload-capable infrastructure to be able to deliver that on, then we can start to take a little bit of this complexity and bring it back down to earth. When we look at storage and when we looked at how we're going to build this storage portfolio, we noticed that customers orient themselves with respect to storage really differently. And it was very interesting how that works. The first type of customer that we ran into, which is the majority of the customers who are looking at themselves as platform focused, is that they see themselves as consumers of storage. Their job is not to manage storage arrays. Right? Their job is not even necessarily to run a virtualization platform, it's to build something that can run the applications that run the company. So they're very interested in automation and elasticity, and these are most of the customers or most of the consumers who are driving the hyper-converged discussion. They just don't care about the infrastructure. What they want is performance and availability. What they demand is operational simplicity and the ability to scale as needed so that they don't have to manage that infrastructure back end. The second type of customers, these are our sand huggers. We love these guys. These are the people who know every nerd knob on every storage array and demand the ability to be able to tweak performance for every workload that's running on there. Right? They don't do a whole lot of consolidation. They're looking at 3, maybe 4 at the top end workloads that are running on an individual storage array. But their passion is protocols and feature sets and storage networking and all the things that go with it. The good news is these are the people that ONTAP is built for. Right? The FAS array and the all-flash FAS array, this is the stuff, the feature sets that sit on top of those two products. This is the stuff that keeps people coming back to NetApp year after year after year. And then finally, we've got the app owner. And the app owner, he doesn't care about storage either. What they want are faster databases. What they want are faster Citrix login profiles. What they want are faster lookups against the table. And they don't care what infrastructure it is. They just want speed for that specific app. Now what happens most of the time here is that this app owner is working with a vendor and sets an SLA on the vendor that the vendor knows the software can't do alone. And so the vendor will include the hardware as well, which gets thrown over to you, and then it becomes your problem. Right? So this, we have the EF series, the E series, all flash, that is specifically designed for this, where I need a faster Oracle database, I need a faster lookup table, I need to be able to do queries faster, I need to be able to do VDI logins faster, that sort of thing. These folks down here are interesting because you never really know what you're going to get. This is why Oracle Exadata exists, because there were Oracle application administrators who said it must be faster, and Oracle said, here, take this to your IT teams, they'll love it. We'll make it faster. Now, when we look at the portfolio, the thing that interests me the most is that we've got a lot of overlap in it. And that overlap is useful because the industry that we exist in isn't static. Right? We know that things are changing all the time. We know that the software gets better on the storage arrays. So for those of you who know NetApp, the version 9 of ONTAP that we released was a stunning increase in performance. And so there were lots of workloads that before we would have given to the EF series, the make it go as fast as possible, that now we can take the same ONTAP software that customers have been using, that customers are happy with, and be able to use it in new places. We also know that the industry as a whole is transforming. And so this entire first silo of traditional IT, and I apologize in advance for the marketing suits, polos, and hoodies that sit down underneath there. It was very awkward when the first time we sat down with a Fortune 500 CIO who was wearing a hoodie. I was like, so where would you like me to sit? Anywhere you want to, sir. So we know that this traditional siloed environment, and we saw a little bit of that here, either we've got organizations that are growing up without it, or we've got organizations that are quickly trying to move as far away from it as possible. We know that when SolidFire got acquired, we had about 50 people who were writing code for the storage array. Today, we have 162. Thank you, $11 billion company that is NetApp. Right? So we know that the feature sets and the things that we can do with the storage array, the things that we can do with the architecture are going to increase, and that's going to change how this looks. And then we know there will be new everything. There will be new infrastructure, we will get new in-memory storage models, we will get persistent RAM, which takes the requirements for a whole bunch of stuff that storage array vendors have had to deal with for years and years off the table. We'll move from 12 gig SAS to NVMe, so we'll have higher performing, lower latency drives that we need to figure out how to use, and the stunning growth in the amount of NAND that they can pack into a single 2.5-inch SSD is just kind of ridiculous. Right? We loved storage, we loved flash storage because it got us out of the, oh look, it's going to take 18 hours to rebuild a RAID array of 2 or 3 terabyte SATA drives. Well, the new 16 terabyte SSDs that NetApp released, you put those in a standard best practices aggregate, it's going to take you 12 hours to repair that RAID strike. Right? Not because we don't love how fast the drives are, but because 16 terabytes in a single drive in a shelf of those drives, just a gargantuan amount of data to be able to manage. So we know that all of this is going to change, and rather than pin everything that we do on one architecture or one product, it makes more sense for NetApp to say, let's figure out what those use cases are. Let's figure out what the problems that we're trying to solve are. We'll bring as many different architectures that are all joined together with that data fabric, that aren't stranded and stuck out on an island by themselves, as we can to bear. And together, we'll figure out what makes the most sense now, but also what makes sense now in the context of where we want to go with that going forward. So our best case is, and what we're focusing, we just got done with our sales kickoff as a company, is to get away from the, this is what we sell, where are you going to put it? And more into the, what are the problems that you're trying to solve? And let's look at the portfolio and figure out what the most efficient way of doing that is. And most efficient, not just in the technology that we're selling, but in the context of where you're coming from, right? Walking in and saying, okay, we need to do node-based, scale-out, shared nothing, all-flash arrays, and you need to get everything else that you currently have off the floor. Well, that doesn't happen very often. But we do have lots of customers who say, I've got a new workload that I need to roll out, and it can't fail, and I don't think anything inside my data center is going to be able to do it for me. How do we build something that I can take care of that problem and then grow over time? And that's really what we want to be able to help with. So to wrap it up, it's a very interesting time in the infrastructure market in general. I know that it can be a very confusing time. There are a lot of people saying lots of things. From a NetApp standpoint, I am happy with how we've tried to stay on the customer side of that. Building a portfolio around your customers rather than around the checkboxes of what storage is available in the industry or what the storage analysts have decided are the most important parts of that has been really fun. It only gets better with feedback from the field, not just folks who know and love NetApp, but maybe folks who have never loved NetApp, maybe folks who have always gone with a competitive product for whatever reason, but sitting down and figuring out what's that feedback, how can we make things better, how can we build out that portfolio to make things work in a little bit better alignment with the day-to-day stuff that everybody has to worry about. So with that, we can certainly take some questions. It looks like we've got maybe 10 minutes or so before the break. Otherwise, I'll let you out of here a little bit early. But thank you all for the time. Oh, we got a question. I'm sorry, guys. Y'all can leave all the way. I'll answer his question alone.
Yeah. Did I hear you say that you could manage storage in AWS or Azure from the NetApp management?
Yes, so we can do a couple things. The first and kind of most traditional would be NetApp private storage, where we can take NetApp on-tap storage arrays or ElementOS solid fire arrays, and we can put them in an Equinix facility, and we can direct connect physical storage to cloud compute. So you build all of your VMs or your instances or your AMIs in the cloud, and then you direct connect them to Azure-based storage, whether that's NFS or ASCII. We can also run the ONTAP software as an AMI directly in AWS. So you can go into the AWS marketplace and you can deploy an ONTAP pair of storage controllers and then use EBS to be able to provide the block storage underneath it, and it works exactly the same way that any NetApp storage array would work. It just lives completely, can be managed from the same tools, can use the same snapshot and replication topologies, can be a source or target for disaster recovery. It's a NetApp array. It's we just virtualized it and put it up there. So we can do lots of things on the physical storage side. We can also use OCI, the On-Command Insight product, as a way to monitor and report across both cloud storage and on-premises storage, completely vendor agnostic. So if you've got 4 different storage vendors on the floor and you're trying to figure out a consolidation strategy, we see lots of customers use it like the old virtualization assessments. Remember, we download it from VMware, put it on a laptop, slide it under a cabinet. 30 days later, we'd have a report of how many hosts we could consolidate down to. We see people using OCI a lot to be able to do that, to figure out what that strategy is going forward, both on premises as well as with cloud storage that they've procured and have stuck off in the corner somewhere on any of the 3 major cloud platforms. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
And then best case for me would be I want you to run all of it from inside vCenter, right? I mean, that's where most of our operators are living day to day anyway. Being able to at least see that telemetry inside one tool so that we don't have them bouncing around. I can't do much about AWS, but with the rest of the NetApp stuff and the on-premises stuff, we can streamline that operationally as much as possible. Any other questions? Excellent. Well, thank you all for your time and enjoy the rest of the day.